Hello everyone. So I was on holiday. I'm actually recording a day later than I usually would. I'm wondering if you can tell. I don't know. Like, do I look a little bit red? It's a little bit stingy. I'll tell you the story. Why not? You know, that's what we're here for. Not to react to these videos. We're here to hear stories from my life. So basically, my mum's family is from Bristol. And Bristol is, if you don't know what Hagrid sounds like, alright there, Harry, it's me, I come from Bristol. That's just so that you know that I have family with a funny accent. And every year, they go down to Weymouth and they have a property, you know, like a kind of like rental holiday property, right? That they go to every single year. So I think they know personally the people who own the property because they've literally been renting it for years. And every single year at the exact same time, they rent it for, I guess, a week. But on the weekend, they do a big thing, which is they call it Taskmaster, which is a TV show in the UK. But all you really need to know is that it's a series of challenges. It's a series of competitive challenges. And everyone shows up and they're divided into groups and they're given these challenges to do. Anyway, so I don't really have too much to say about Taskmaster, but in terms of what it's really about, which is having an opportunity to hang out with the family, it's delightful. You know, every year. But I see, as you know, my wife is American, and in America, unless you happen to grow up pretty much like, or make a point of growing up in the immediate vicinity of your parents, you're going to move away and realistically reach a point where you're hardly ever going to see your family because everyone's a million miles away, right? Like this was a long journey for us, but a short journey for an American. To get from where I live to Weymouth is about 4 hours. So in the grand schemes of the UK, 4 hours, that's quite a long journey. But for an American, that's like nothing. And of course, that's why Americans, I feel like, again, unless they really make a point of all staying together, they really don't have family reunions, anything like as much. So that's nice, and I'm very thankful for that. The fact that I am blessed enough that I'm able to get together with my whole family on a yearly basis. And it was a load of fun. And we had all sorts of, just all sorts going on. I don't really have any comments, except for the fact I got sunburnt. The one thing I will say is that I actually don't like beach holidays. I think beach holidays are, I can't get my head around them because it's like, they're supposed to be relaxing, but if you go to a beach, chances are it's going to be pretty crowded, right? Unless you've, like, sure, okay, if you've got a private beach, okay, whatever, but chances are it's going to be pretty crowded. And if you're going to be, if your hotel's right by the beach, then that's going to be quite expensive. If your hotel is recessed a bit and not completely by the beach, then that means that any going back and forth that you would want to do is going to be made impractical because you're going to have to like walk around, like what, you're going to get dressed, you're going to desand yourself every single time. So in which case then you have to bring everything with you. So you got like all that weight. The water is going to be salty. You get any in your mouth, that's going to suck, and it's cold. The sand is going to stick to you. It's going to get all over the place. God help you if you get even the tiniest amount in your bed, because it will just make everything scratchy and uncomfortable. And then if you put on suntan lotion, or rather sunscreen, I guess, which you should, then you end up sticky and gross. And of course, combine it with the fact that you're probably going to the beach because it's hot, where of course the thing you're supposed to do is lie on the beach getting hot, which means getting sweaty. So now you've got sweat and sun cream lotion, which is kind of like sticky cream all over you, and you've probably got sand stuck to you, and you've got kids running around screaming. Maybe they're kicking up sand. And this is relaxing. And then on top of that, there's the fact that, you know, it's not even especially good for you, because like the whole thing with sunbathing, right? Essentially, you either wear a lot of sunscreen, in which case, what's even the point in lying out in the sun? Like, what are you actually achieving by lying in the sun if you're covered in sunscreen? You're basically just making sure the sun has no effect on you at all. But then the alternative is you don't wear sunscreen, in which case, well, then you're getting the main effect that the sun is likely to have on unprotected human skin, which is damage. So, and yes, I did get a bit sunburnt, which sucks. Again, I got sunburnt because of the little calculation I had to make of what would I rather try to avoid getting too much sun, which means that I don't then have to walk around sticky all day, covered in sunscreen. So yeah, that's the calculation I made. I did swim in the sea because the only thing that I can bring myself to do on a beach holiday that I really see any point in is swimming in the sea. Because one, I think there's at least some argument that the kind of salt, like seawater, is supposed to be good for you. And even if it's not good for you, the fact it's very natural, like the fact you're swimming in the ocean, it feels good for you. The fact it is cold, I did complain about it, but I think in a way, you know, that there's kind of that like like there's I can understand the logic of experiencing a variety of temperatures can kind of be good for centering yourself and stuff like that. And also, of course, it's exercise. You're literally swimming, but I think the fact I was swimming for a period of time and any sunscreen I did have on probably got washed off in the process of me swimming did result in me getting a bit burnt on my shoulders. All right, we're going to jump into this video now. This is, of course, the video that you voted for me to continue, so I'm happy to continue with it. We're going to have to really put our foot on the floor here. Rest assured, there may be periods of time where I don't respond to something. That's probably not because nothing stupid is being said, but I'm going to try to be circumspect with what precise stupid things I respond to. So this is that. We're really aiming to get to just shy of 40 minutes so we can finish this in 3 parts. Realistically, we're not going to finish this in 2 parts. This is the second part. We've still got 40 minutes to go. So we're going to jump in, and I hope you all enjoy, and I hope that you didn't mind that I told you a little story about what I was doing over the weekend. I thought it was a fun story that was worth telling you, so if you disagree, then I am sorry.
I wonder whether we could easily, in the UK, in the US, and elsewhere, find statistics that support the notion that prison guards are actually more dangerous to women in prison. I mean...
Very stupid response. So Ash Sakar, to be fair to her, and I have been fair to her at several points, brings up the thing of, well, what about biological males in women's prisons? Isn't that a genuine concern, and isn't it legitimate to argue there's a problem there? How would you respond to that? And Judith Butler just says, well, I think we could find some evidence that prison guards are more dangerous. And it's like, okay, sure. What the hell does that have to do with anything? Like, that's so dumb. But let's suppose I said, hey, you know, I think that we should just let some notorious, like, horrible criminal, just like the worst kind of criminal, I think we should just let them into a preschool. Just let them just hang out in a preschool, or like a juvenile, let's say a juvenile corrections facility. And I said that. And so I said, well, that doesn't seem right. And I said, well, I think we could probably find some evidence that the officers, the prison guards at juvenile correction facilities are more dangerous to children than this particular criminal. It's like, well, yeah, sure, because there's just one of him. Like, it's going to be a rare case. But, like, what does that have to do with anything? You know, it's not really responding to the objection that why would you put this dangerous criminal in the presence of incredibly vulnerable people?
I'd like to see the larger picture first, and then we can ask that question about this trans woman who happens to be in...
Okay, I find this hilarious because something I often say, and I feel like some people might say I'm disingenuous in saying this, is that we need to fundamentally change the way that we as society view gender before we can say, well, clearly the solution to these people who have these negative, anxious feelings about gender, clearly the solution for them is that we chop off all their bits and give them wrong sex hormones and all this kind of extreme stuff. Surely we should just rethink the way our society views gender first. And I can understand somebody saying, okay, that's true, but, you know, this seems like you're setting up an impossible standard where society has to completely radically change on these points before we even talk about the question of what do we actually do with the people suffering with gender dysphoria now. And I can understand that, and I do have responses to that and as objection, but what I will say is certainly this is at least as much of a case of that, and I would argue it's actually a more extreme case to say, well, sure, we can talk about male sex criminals in women's prisons, but before we do that, we have to engage in this massive society-wide academic intersectional analysis of all things relating to the matrices of sex and gender and sexual violence. Like, that's a ridiculous thing to say, but that is what Judith Butler's saying here. And, it's a very cynical interpretation, but I suspect a very accurate one would be that this is literally just using academic language to avoid actually talking about a real issue that's affecting real people right now and their suffering.
Because what's going to happen to that trans woman in a men's prison? That trans woman is going to be the object of sexual violation. So if you say that person...
Okay, so the thing there is that, first of all, you do not know that. That's not necessarily true, because you'll notice that there's an assumption that a trans-identified male, a so-called trans woman, is always a feminine male? Maybe a trans woman is the biggest, strongest, most masculine, most aggressive biological male woman in any given prison they're going to go to. Maybe a trans-identified male, maybe a so-called trans woman, is actually, in fact, the sexual violator of men in a men's prison, for all we know. So in that case, how could you then say they should go into a women's prison? And here's the other issue of that. This is the other massive issue of that. What about the biological males who are feminine, maybe gay, maybe gender non-conforming and cross-dressing, who do not identify as women? Because those people exist. Are they not incredibly likely to be victims of male-on-male sexual violence in male prisons? So, by even phrasing this as basically, well, we need to let trans-identified males enter women's prisons because that protects these women, in reality, these kind of maybe perhaps feminine men, from the sexual violation they would otherwise experience in men's prisons, you're creating a situation where the men who are vulnerable but do not identify as trans are getting completely ignored. That's the other issue here, to even suggest that moving to a woman's prison is a solution for these men. You are essentially creating a situation where any man who's honest and who actually cares about women's rights, the kind of man who's actually clearly, he's in prison, so presumably he's done something wrong, but on some level a decent person, and maybe a very vulnerable person, that they're the ones who actually suffer, whereas the men who are either willing to, or, who are willing to lie about being women, they're the ones who benefit, whether they're doing so because actually they seriously are in danger in the men's prison, in which case you can understand it, but still, clearly they're not, at least no more deserving of protection than the biological males who are in danger and don't want to lie and pretend they're women in order to get into women's spaces. And all of that is to say nothing of the biological males who maybe the reason they're under threat in a man's prison is because they are a sex criminal, and sex criminals tend to experience. It's all a bit counterintuitive. I've never fully understood it. That basically, if you're a kind of paedophile in a man's prison, then you're subject to basically a lot more sexual violence and risk of being killed. But the sexual violence thing's a bit weird, because it's okay, so you're a really horrible kind of rapist, so the solution is that you then get raped. That's dumb, obviously. And for the record, I do not, even in those really extreme crimes, I absolutely do not support any kind of prison justice. I think it's complete nonsense, and I think the idea that justice can ever be served by somebody being raped is disgusting, and I really am morally opposed to anyone who would make that kind of argument. But obviously, such a person who is a criminal in that way, who then decides to identify as a woman, not just because they're under threat for being such a kind of notorious sex criminal that a lot of biological males in prison would want to actually, attack them, but actually because identifying as a woman entering a woman's prison gives them more options for how to continue to be sexually violent against vulnerable people. So it's just completely ridiculous to try and make this argument of, well, what about these trans-identified males who are under threat in a men's prison? Okay, what about them? That's a different question.
what you're doing is recommending sexual violation over there in order to protect yourself against the prospect, the fantasy.
I'll just say, look, of course, the big thing is to prevent sexual violence in prison at all. And I've said before, I do not understand, like, surely the main thing about prison is that you lose your freedom and your privacy. Right? Those are the two big things about prison, which I would think is obvious. So I do not understand how any sort of violence and serious rule breaking occurs in prison unless it is tacitly being endorsed. Like, that is something that will never make sense to me. Like, surely, like, I just don't understand why in prison you don't just have security cameras everywhere and everyone's constantly being watched, and as soon as anyone does anything untoward, it's just immediate boom, sorted. Like, get in there, stop that happening right away, and punish the other person. Like, I really don't understand how it is that it's like, oh, we're in prison, it's really impossible to escape, but oh, we're able to get drugs in here. Oh, we're able to, sexually attack people. And that's like something that you would think on some level has to be reasonably protracted as an attack. It just makes no sense to me. Yeah, like I've said before that I think that in general, I know there's that comment from like Americans like, oh, I would never trade my freedom for more security. Screw that. I would happily trade on a society-wide level a lot of freedom and privacy if it meant more security, because I don't want people to suffer and die. But certainly in the context of a prison, you can't even make an argument that prisoners deserve freedom and privacy, because that's the whole point of prison. They lose that as a punishment. So then surely at least you would then get the benefit that, well, we can stop all this bad stuff happening. It makes no sense.
How is sexual violation actually happening in prisons? And then we can make a more grounded judgment.
You know what? When Judith Butler says things like this, I like to imagine that she's saying all this in this exact tone, but she's saying it to a woman in prison who has just been sexually assaulted by a trans-identified male. I'd love to see her have the nerve to do that. Because she's saying this, and it's so clear she's saying all of this because she has reduced it to this theoretical, academic abstract, and she's not thinking about the real women who are suffering here.
But someone might say, okay, drawing back to that bigger picture isn't telling me what to do with this immediate situation as and when it arises. You know, there's a question.
I feel so sorry for Ashtikar, because on some level she must realise these people she's interviewing, like, she's giving them pretty softball, like, I mean, this is literally called, oh, actually, I didn't say this, but at the beginning, she said, like, oh, she's playing devil's advocate. It must suck. Like, when you're interviewing someone with whom you agree, and you're playing devil's advocate, and it's so obvious the person you're talking to doesn't have any responses. To just, like, you're playing devil's advocate, you're just, like, prompting them with obvious questions. And the point of playing devil's advocate is supposed to be that you prompt them with the kind of the questions so that they then have an opportunity to respond and to allay people's concerns. And on some level, Ashtikar must be aware that these people, like every single person I've ever seen her interview on the trans issue, they aren't able to do the thing that's supposed to be done after someone plays devil's advocate. They're not able to say anything. Like, it must suck to know that anyone who goes into this video with any sort of skepticism around trans identity is going to see Judith Butler's responses here and be like, okay, Ashtikar gave her that prompt of that, you know, devil's advocate, what about biological males in the spaces of vulnerable women? And Judith Butler was completely unable to answer it. And it must suck for Ashtikar to know that.
Anybody who violates another person sexually needs to be held accountable, and we need procedures for that. But we don't.
Literally all lives matter talk right there. To say, well, let's completely ignore any question about who's doing this, about kind of, you know, the reality that we live in a society where these different demographic groups exist, and it's worth analysing things sometimes through a gendered lens, through a racial lens, through an ethnic lens, not with the intention of then saying, something bigoted to basically say, well, look, clearly this group has just massive problem that just means they're all terrible people, but to recognise that these demographics, whether socially constructed or not, have an impact on how people, exist in society and the kind of things they're likely to do. That's just, I mean, it's a common thing that you would expect a progressive to say, that we should understand that, again, the quote I often use is that race is real and that its effects are real. And I liken that to the fact that sex and gender are real. Well, sex is real no matter what, but gender is real in that its effects are real. Like, that's also true. So is there anything actually in reality to femininity? Well, in some sense, it's something we just made up. But in another sense, of course, it's real because its effects are real, the fact that there's this expectation. So it's a progressive idea, but it's also an idea that just anyone who is remotely intelligent should recognize that we need to be able to talk about this demographic. And of course, that's, the whole thing with All Lives Matter is that, when it comes to police violence in the US, I think a lot of people overly racialize it in a way which I think is inaccurate, because there are many, many examples of white people in the US being shot by the police for absolutely no justification. I don't think it's as racial of an issue as it's made out to be. But nonetheless, certainly it is true that disproportionately more black people in the US are shot by the police than white people. That there certainly are racial aspects, racial dimensions to a lot of the problems with law enforcement in the United States. And that's the problem with saying all lives matter. That if somebody is talking about these things that relate to, in some way, race, for somebody to say, well, sure, but isn't this just a problem in general? Well, all you're doing there is you're taking away from the proper focus being put, at least to some extent. And yeah, I do think organizations like Black Lives Matter, in case you can't tell by their name, probably put too much focus on the idea that it's all a completely racial thing, which I just think is inaccurate. But the point is, of course, nobody should say, you shouldn't say it's all 100% about somebody being a part of this demographic, but you certainly shouldn't go the other way and say, well, there's no demographic dimension to this at all. Literally, essentially, if a poor black person who is, has all these examples of not being privileged, it gets shot by the police, then that is exactly the same, and we should not in any sense talk about that differently or have any sort of a different analysis of that than we would if a random white, wealthy, middle-class person was shot by the police. As if those two things are the same. That's completely ridiculous to say. And yet, this is exactly what Judith Butler's doing here, by saying, well, what we need to do is just talk about the reality of prison violence itself and completely detach that from any discussion about what specific demographics tend to be doing. It's the fact that prison violence in women's prisons is, I imagine, very low between biological females compared to how common it is between biological males. Again, I don't have the exact statistics of that, but I'd eat my hat if I'm not right to just speculate without any specific statistics that that's true.
Don't discriminate against kinds of violators. They're all bad.
See, yeah, there you go. It sucks to see someone who is actually considered wrongly to be intelligent by a lot of people to say something which that she wouldn't be consistent on this point. That she wouldn't, if this was a discussion about the racial dimension to police violence, she would not be saying any of this.
The general truth of the category, all trans women are this way, or all trans women represent this risk.
Straw man, no one said that.
One black person does one thing. Well, that's what black people, and that's what happens in right-wing propaganda, right? That is exactly how presidential, elections are run in the U.S. You find one migrant who did this one thing, and then that stands for all migrants. So that's a right-wing strategy. It's a racist.
Okay, can I say, so this is actually really interesting. Recently in the UK, yesterday, I think, there was a knife attack. And it was someone, I think they went into a preschool or a nursery group, and they just stabbed people. Seemingly their intention was to stab children. Now, to me, that sounds like the kind of thing that would be done more by I'd be inclined to say that's a mental health issue. But I don't know, some people are saying that this person is a Muslim, and I will say this, I think right-wing conservatives are idiots. I'm sorry, but again, I suppose I always find myself saying things like that, and I have to remind myself, most people are idiots. So I'm always maybe I just need to recognize the fact that, because I'm not a right-wing conservative, I've made an effort to interact with and kind of, cultivate a group of people around me who broadly agree with me on stuff. And obviously those people are going to be kind of more intelligent, because otherwise I would get annoyed by how stupid they are. And I can see that maybe there are people who actually do agree with me on stuff and agree with me on all sorts of different opinions, but actually they're stupid. And, someone else would look at my position and be like, oh, they're all idiots because they've only interacted with idiots. But what I'll say is this. There were so many people retweeting the exact same line about this person being a specific person, like Shahari Hashala Ali or something like that. And they were saying, like, this person is a migrant worker, an asylum seeker from some place, and they came here on this date, and, they're a known terrorist sympathizer and blah, blah, blah. And I was looking, and I was like, where are these people getting this from? Because the only evidence I could find of any of this, even of the person's name, was all from, like, random right-wing websites. And like, they were saying things like, the media's afraid to report on this. And it's like, what do you mean the media's afraid? It sounds like you all just got this from some completely unreliable source. Like, there was no indication this was coming from any sort of reliable source at all. And that just annoyed me, because I was like, it annoys me when people are, like, proud about being stupid. And I'm sorry, but if you, like, retweet as if it's a fact, like, literally the same day that an attack has happened, obviously the information is not going to come out right away. And if you're retweeting this stuff, not only like wildly speculative and acting like it's true, but acting like it's true, and anyone who's not just as furiously spreading this information, which may well be misinformation, is like a coward. And like, you are very stupid. Like, you're an idiot. Like, that's the thing. Like, you would not ever catch me. And I hope like no intelligent person would retweet something like that. I'd be like, oh yeah, well, it's been less than 24 hours, but we 100% know every single detail about exactly who this person is. Why? Where did it come from? Who knows? It's stupid. Anyway. But the thing is, whenever, like, I have criticisms of Islam, but whenever there is an attack made by a specific Muslim. Let's say this is a terrorist attack by a Muslim. A terrorist attack by a Muslim specifically inspired by, the problematic verses in the Quran. At that point, I back off and I'm like, well, I'm not going to talk about this, because I don't want people to think, well, what this is about is that this specific Muslim did this thing, and therefore that means Islam is bad. No. The reason why Islam is bad is because of the commands made in Islam. The commands the Quran makes that tell Muslims to violently subjugate unbelievers. That's why Islam is bad, and that continues to be a bad aspect of Islam, whether 100 terrorist attacks, Islamic terrorist attacks, have happened in a day, or one terrorist attack has happened, or no terrorist attacks have happened. Indeed, it continues to be a problem with Islam if Muslims doing something really incredible. And honestly, I'm more likely to talk about the fundamental evil with the commands of the Islamic religion after a Muslim has done something wonderful. If it's a Muslim runs a marathon and raises money and gives all the money to charity, then I would be happy to say, yeah, but this person still literally follows a religion that says that unbelievers should be violently subjugated, that it is acceptable for men to beat their wives, and that a man who was 52 years old and married a 6-year-old girl, a 6-year-old child, is an example to all humanity. And this Muslim may have done all these wonderful things, but Islam is still Islam, and as long as this person is claiming to be a Muslim, they're still saying that all these terrible things about Islam are good. Whereas, of course, again, if a Muslim has done something individually bad, I don't want to talk about that, because I don't want the conversation to be about this random thing. But it's the exact same thing with trans identity, right? If a trans-identified male does something wonderful, I'm still going to be there to point out that they're still making a claim about reality that I don't think is accurate. And I think it's quite probably rightly regarded as offensive by a lot of women, that a biological male can be a woman if they've done something good. I think it's unproductive to specifically say, well, let's talk about these fundamental problems with trans identity immediately after a trans-identified male has done something wrong. Because then you do give the impression that, oh, I guess if trans-identified males all did good things, if they never did any of this bad stuff, then everything would be fine. No, they'd still be making a nonsense claim about reality. They'd still be saying that womanhood is a costume. Like, these problems exist, and that's the key thing. And I'm not saying there aren't movements and ideologies that can be regarded as bad because of the actions of their followers. But most of the time, when we're talking about serious, meaningful ideological criticisms, those criticisms remain entirely unchanged, regardless of the actions of the people involved.
You're taking language, taking attention, taking social capital or status from them. I wonder if that could be...
Taking meaning is what's being taken, by the way.
Linked to Wendy Brown's idea of wounded attachment, that you have a wounded attachment to a position of marginality, and there is a certain amount of social capital that comes with it, and you don't want to let it go.
Well, if I...
Again, like, that's probably part of it, yeah. Like, the fact that somebody... that, like, womanhood has all of this baggage, that some of it's, like, negative, makes it more offensive when someone comes in and completely undermines that meaning. But there are categorizations that people might feel literally no way about. I mean, like, let's say being right-handed. Yeah, I know there's like a history of like left-handed being stigmatized, but I think we're pretty much okay to say that nowadays that's not really a thing. So I'm right-handed. I'm right-handed because if you give me a pencil, that feels awesome. You know, I'll write my name. This already, that feels incredibly uncomfortable. If I try and write, I can't. Like, you can see, like, this is me. Like, it's kind of jittery. Like, they're nice and kind of easily controlled. All right, K, C. Here, already feels uncomfortable. K, C. Like, and that was in the air. Like, I think braced against something else, I'd feel the jitteriness more. But of course, I assume you're familiar with the concept of dexterity and, indeed, non-dexterity. The point is, I don't care. I don't care that I'm right-handed. But if someone said, yeah, I'm right-handed too, and then they started writing perfectly with their left hand, and then they held it in their right hand, and they were like jittery, and they couldn't really get a good grip on it, and then they started writing, and it was kind of jagged, as if they just couldn't move as smoothly with their right hand, I'd say, you're not right-handed. So, yes, other things... And obviously I'm not really part of any sort of marginalized demographic, but even just demographics that have some sort of social relevance, like being a male, like being white. If someone makes those claims, again, it's not going to be as offensive to me because I don't feel like there's any real demographic to which I belong to that I have any sort of sense of being a victim about. And I know, like, nowadays the kind of, to say victim is sort of a dirty word, but I just mean, you know, someone who experiences a lot of negative things. I don't really have that. But even still, I'm like, well, this obviously matters even more because there is some social relevance here. So certainly if then on top of that, this was something where I was aware of kind of prejudice and oppression related to these things, whether current or something I'd experienced, or historical and something that was maybe kind of broader, that would offend me more. You know, there are probably black people who aren't really aware of any current individual oppression in their lives, but, and maybe also women as well, but they're aware, first of all, that there is perhaps a broader oppression of black people or women or whatever that maybe they don't individually experience, but that they're aware of. But certainly they're aware that there's a historical oppression, and there are times in history where they'd almost have been guaranteed to have been oppressed. And maybe even killed because of who they were. So within that context, of course, that's going to offend people more. This isn't really that shocking.
We do suffer wounds, you know, many of us, gay, lesbian, trans, women, people of color, workers, a lot of us have been.
Can I say this just very briefly? The one thing that's striking, because I often just get involved in the matter of debunking someone and just looking at what they said and just thinking to myself, is their argument correct? Does it make sense? So on and so forth. The one thing that I always kind of try to have in mind, especially with something like this where it's a lecture with someone who's supposed to be intelligent, is just the fact that she's not saying anything even insightful. Like, I'm just imagining myself in a situation of, what if I really wanted to hear Judith Butler talk about this? What if I was like, oh, an interview with Judith Butler, wonderful. And I watched it and I was like, well, nothing's that's being said here. Like, most of this barely even qualifies as any sort of point. It's just saying fluff. And I think that is, a problem, obviously.
How do any of the people who live in that category, how are they actually suffering? It seems to me that what they're suffering from is a kind of hatred or phobia that is overwhelming to them.
Judith Butler misunderstood the question there. Like, I'm sorry, but it sucks because I know Ashley Carr. I mean, first of all, I know I'm not like I've never been interviewed by any kind of mainstream person or anything like that. Like, I've been interviewed by a few people who've said, hey, can I have you on my show? But I think almost always they've had fewer subscribers than me, which is, fine, whatever. It would be so fun to be interviewed by Ashley Carr just because I feel like there's no way around. I always call her Ashley Carr. I don't know why I always call her by full name. Because I feel so strongly that she would have to admit, because let's say she asked kind of similar questions, basically some questions where she was challenging me on, the types of arguments that transsexuals would make, trans activists would make, but then also at the same time asking me to clarify my own position. I feel like, and again, in this exact same kind of context of not being confrontational, just saying, hey, let's have a talk, tell me what you think. I feel like she'd have to admit at the end of it, she'd have to be honest with herself and say at the end of it, that person I was just speaking to, King Critical, gave a so much better response than any of the trans activists I've interviewed. That when I asked him to explain his position, he explained it well, he explained it coherently, and I'm not saying this because, I'm fantastic. I'm saying it because the position makes sense, and it's very easy to explain the position. And then when presented with the other side, I'm able to say, well, no, look, here are the issues. You say that biological males can be women, but here are the implications of that, and that's why it creates an issue. Judith Butler misunderstood the question, because the question was, as I kind of already covered, the idea that biological females feel especially offended by people claiming womanhood because of the kind of wounds that are attached to the female identity as a result of patriarchy. And Judith Butler saying, well, how are these people wounded by biological males claiming to be women? That wasn't the question. The question wasn't to do with the act of trans identity increasing the hurt of women. The question was, given that women do experience hurt as a result of being women, that is why, or is that not why, they are especially offended by biological males claiming to be women, because that's a category that's been hurt so much by. And Judith Butler's misunderstood that question and thinks it's saying, aren't they upset because the act of biological males in themselves identifying as women is what causes women to be wounded and causes women to be hurt? That was not the question. Judith Butler, supposed to be some academic, asked incredibly softball questions by Ashley Carr, misunderstands the question. Clearly misunderstands the question. And I don't know, is Ashley Carr going to call it out? Probably not. Because again, Ashley Carr's stuck in a situation where I just, I don't know, but for some reason I just feel like I have a strong sense of, who Ashley Carr is as a person. And in my head, I just can't help but imagine her thinking to herself, oh God, this person's actually not really giving very good responses. This person's not even understanding the question I'm asking. But I can't push this too much because this person's on my side and it's going to look embarrassing if I have this advocate for my side for being pro-trans identity on here, and I point out every single time that they give an unsatisfactory answer or fail to answer a question or fail to understand a question, because that's just going to make my side look really stupid. It's got to be an awkward situation.
Are there limits to the powers of self-definition?
Good question. No, there's not going to be a good response.
If I was to continue presenting in the way that I am now, exactly the same, and I was to say, actually, my preference would be for he, him pronouns. I'd like to be addressed as a man.
I've often thought to myself, because again, despite the fact that I have never really been seriously interviewed by any kind of, in any sort of really serious context, I've often gone through, if I ever get the opportunity, especially I'm not talking about, being interviewed by someone who already really knows about this topic, but someone who's kind of more well, like, you know, a BBC presenter or something like that. Like if at some point somebody at like BBC Radio 4 finds my channel, like, oh, you know, the trans issue is interesting. Let's talk to this guy. He's got you know, a few views, whatever. Like if that happened, I've always thought, well, you know, let's just let's prepare a little bit and think about what I'd say. And I've always known the one thing I'd really want to say, it would be especially useful if I was being interviewed by a woman reporter who especially was not white. And there are certainly a lot of reporters in the UK who are women who are not white, but perhaps not. But essentially, the first thing I'd say is, you know, if I said to you, I'm a BBC reporter, I'm a reporter with the BBC, you would know that's wrong. And it would almost maybe even offend you for me to say that, because you'd know, well, what it means. That, you know, I don't work for the BBC. You know that, you know, while I might report on some things on my YouTube channel, I'm not a journalist in the same way that you are. That I am, you know, I'm not on the same kind of media you are and things like that. You know, if I said that I was whatever race they were, Indian, or of Indian extraction, they would know that that's wrong. Kind of get that point across of, look, there's so many categories where if I said I was this thing, you would know that I'm not that thing. Age, you know, again, I wouldn't necessarily want to guess at their age, but, you know, if I said I was a radically different age than what I am, you'd know that's wrong. And yet, if I then said I'm a woman, suddenly there's this question of, oh, can we challenge that? Can we actually say that's not correct? And I don't understand why. And I think that's a really important question. And I think that is, I imagine that's a good way to get people to understand this issue. To say, there's so many categories I could go through, almost every single category. If I said I'm an electrician, like whether it's jobs, age, race, religion to an extent, some people are a bit iffy about religion, marital status. If I said, well, I am married, so if I said that I'm not married when I am, then that's a problem, because to be married means something. So, sexuality as well, but so many different things. And we are completely comfortable saying, well, that's not true, you're not that thing. But for some reason, suddenly when it comes to categories of man and woman, we're like, oh, no, are you allowed to say that person's not that thing? Well, of course you are, because you're allowed to in all these other cases. It just makes no sense. Okay, so just for record, I'm going to update you. So far, Butler's just said that people express themselves in different ways, and lots of people vary in how they express themselves, whether they're trans or not. People have their variant expression. Not thus far a response to Ashton Carr's point.
You're assuming that gender presentation, that gender identification can be read off of gender presentation, and it is not always the case.
So the argument, I guess, would be no, there are no limitations. The one thing I point out here is that this is only a problem for trans activists, right? Because a gender critical person absolutely can believe that somebody can look 100% masculine or feminine, and that has no bearing on whether they're a man or woman, because we recognize what actually makes someone a man or woman is biological sex. The problem with trans identity is that they're saying it's not about biological sex. So then the only way that it can still be meaningful is for it to be about presentation. That's the issue.
I understand that, and I understand that it's not always the case.
Oh God, like again, I have to believe. Like, I'm not saying I have the best theory of mind, but I have to believe that Ashton Carr, on some level, feels conflicted in knowing how consistently unsatisfied she is with these responses she's getting. Because every single time that she asks a question, Judith Butler gives a non-response, and then it goes back to Ashton Carr, and Ashton Carr goes, I hear what you're saying, like basically does this thing that makes it very clear, so clear, that she is incredibly disappointed with the fact she has not got a clear, satisfying response to her question. And now she's trying to come back to it in a way that tries to get a better answer, but without making it obvious quite how dissatisfied she is with the answer. I cannot believe that Ashton Carr's body language, Ashton Carr's cadence communicates anything other than that reality.
How to live with that deep sense of disjunction, and you're effaced by the...
I genuinely do not understand the mentality of obstinately refusing to give any signifiers at all of how you identify or how you understand yourself, and then being like really like really triggered by the fact that people don't recognize you as you are. Like, that just to me makes no sense. To be like it's just dumb. It's just dumb.
What we're asking for isn't very much at all. It is the right to be affirmed in our chosen gender, and that is not...
That's a massive amount to be asking.
...an imposition on anyone else.
It is an imposition, but okay.
Natal women, they want to get a job without being discriminated against. They want to love who they want to love. They want their lives and their loves to be recognized minimally or maximally by society, and to live in freedom and without fear.
Okay. The issue here is that the big question is, should, like, what ultimately trans activists have to want, if they want anything, is for people to say that a biological male can be a woman. And that is not comparable to anything that women want. Now, yeah, okay, you could say, well, women want to be recognized as women, but they want to do that having given clear arguments for why a biological female should be considered a woman. And as for this other stuff, wanting to live in fear, I don't have a problem with that. Like, here's the problem. No one has an issue with trans-identified males being able to be safe from discrimination, safe from anything that can make them feel like in danger or anything like that. But again, the problem is Ashley Carr's already said, well, some people want to just be considered women, and that's not a big deal. Yeah, it is a massive deal. That's the big problem. So yeah, actually, Butler's right here to be like, well, these people just want to feel safe, and clearly that's just like normal because obviously regular women want to feel safe. Yeah, like that's not the objection. That people wanting to feel safe, that's fine.
So what is self-definition if not a form of radical liberty?
The sex assignment they receive is deeply right and true and absolutely incontrovertible, and they would never change it, and they kind of like it, or they really like it, and they're living it out.
Just for record, not would never change it, could never change it. I've probably done a bit of editing there because I want it to be clear. The question is, how is self-identity, trans self-identity, not just a form of radical liberty or voluntarism where essentially anything goes and you can just do whatever you want? That's the question, and I'm interested to see how Butler will answer that question. But yeah, with that said, there's probably going to have to be some cutting because so far Butler has not responded to that question in any kind of satisfying way. I'm going to let it play until something is said that does respond to that question, and then I will respond.
But then, look, for some people it's very fundamental, like this was never right. And for some...
You are not answering the question. She's so not answering the question, and it's so annoying. Because I would. It's frustrating to know that Ashley Carr is asking these questions and not getting a response, getting people to just not answer, and it's been going on so long and there's not been an answer to the question, and knowing you asked me this question, like, well, no, because the thing is you wouldn't need to ask me the question because, like, I'd be like, well, it is just a form of, like, radical liberty that doesn't really make any sense because you're literally just saying that anything goes. But ask me any of, like, this, like, challenging questions around, like, the gender critical position. I don't think there are that many challenging questions because I think it's quite an easy position to uphold. But the most challenging question, I would at least get to answering that question in a timely manner, instead of doing what Butler's doing here, of being like, well, let me just go on this massive rant about nothing, really not responding at all. Embarrassing.
You stay in the unlivable category and we will deprive you of a livable life.
This makes no sense because literally it's just what you call yourself. Like, that's the thing. This makes no sense. I cannot understand somebody saying being a woman or being a man is not livable for me. Because all being a woman or a man is recognizing the reality of your biological sex. That's all it is. And you can't change your biological sex. So this isn't even like a normative question about what do we do? No, like it's reality. This is like saying if someone doesn't want to fly, why would we tell them that they're not allowed to fly? Well, it's not about telling them they're not allowed to fly. It's about telling them they literally can't fly. It's stupid.
We accept that somebody is telling us what's livable and what's unlivable. But do we call that a choice? It's like, well, it may be that the the deepest sense of who one is as a sexed being, or
Okay, so essentially it seems to me like the argument so far is, well, it's not like a choice, it's not just something you can make up, because it's based on someone saying something being fundamentally unlivable. Okay, I've got two issues here. One, in terms of practicality, that ultimately it is a choice, because how can you know whether someone in saying, oh, I'm a woman, how can you know whether they're saying that? Because it's fundamentally like they are forced by it, the fact it's so traumatic to them to be that which they claim they're not, that like it's not a choice because they just have to do it. How can you know that's the case? Like, surely it's possible that they are just like, oh, let's just say I'm a woman for a lark. So in terms of practicality, you're admitting it is basically just a choice. But the other issue is, it only makes sense if what you're saying is this constraint upon you actually is a constraint. Because in reality, to be who you are is not something that you are forced to not be. Like, I know this seems like such an obvious thing, but you are not forced to not be what you are. If you're a biological male, then you are a man, and you can't say, well, obviously I had to say I'm a woman, because it wasn't even my choice to say I'm a woman. I was forced because being a man was just impossible for me. Like, that doesn't make any sense, because it's the opposite. It's impossible for you to not be a man because you're biologically male. That's the big issue, basically. So there we go. That was literally the only response we got to that self-identification thing. A lot of time talking about it. Nothing really of substance said. I'm embarrassed. We've technically managed to make it so that we've only got 20 minutes left, so we should still be on course to finish this in 3 parts. I hope you all had fun. I hope you're all excited for next week. And, well, hopefully, you all vote for this to continue next week, because then, I'm excited to see how it ends. Anyway, I'll see you all, I'll see you all later. I hope you enjoyed. Bye.